Hello and welcome to episode 24 of the Welder podcast. In this episode, we talk with Alicia, who is a project officer for the Welsh Beaver Project. She takes things back to basics by sharing her encyclopedic knowledge of beavers, why they're important and how we're bringing them back to Wales. Hello, Tom.
Hello. It is becoming a habit. Should we start with an apology?
An apology for our tardiness?
Yes.
Yeah, we're regular listeners, of which I'm sure there are many, might have noticed.
Probably. Your mum, my mum, dad maybe, you never know. But anyway, yeah, keep going.
That we are, in fact, 2 weeks late from our normal self-imposed podcast schedule. And regular listeners might also remember that on our last podcast, Tom introduced his heroic activities of running 100, what, I got it wrong yesterday, how far exactly?
It was meant to be 187 miles along Offa's Dyke. A little bit more than that in the end, but, I don't know how it works, but over 300 kilometres in the end.
Do you want to round it up to 200 miles? Will that make you feel
I mean, yeah.
So do you want to share, Tom, why, as opposed to your normal upright and engaged recording position, you're currently reclined on the sofa?
With my foot up.
With your foot up.
So just as a recap, myself and two other friends, we did an event for charity. I organised it, raising awareness of the High Ground charity, which helps veterans get into employment in the land-based sector. And yeah, we wanted to do Offa's Dyke in 6 days, which is about just over 50 kilometres each day with quite a lot of elevation. In the end, it ended up being something like 9.5 kilometres worth of elevation gain as well. However, unfortunately, beginning of day 6, the last day, my ankle swelled up. And thinking about it at the time, I knew that, Chloe, there's no way that you would give me another 6 days to complete this challenge. So it's your fault, basically. I had to crack on. So I did 33 odd miles with a steadily increasing swelling in my foot to the point where halfway through I realised I couldn't keep walking forwards in a straight line, and therefore I had to then crab walk.
I'm sort of tempted to stick the video somewhere. It is quite amusing.
The last 13 or so miles to the end, but we finished, and that's the important thing.
What's not so amusing are your boot and crutches.
No, I have the boot of shame, and I'm now on crutches, and funnily enough, it's actually quite painful. So, Chloe, you were dealing with a grumpy Tom at the moment.
So he's not quite as sparkiest in today's recording. Yeah, I sort of bullied into it slightly.
No, I love it, and there's so much to talk about. So I think we should just move off the topic of me being grumpy and go on to the interesting stuff.
Let's do that. So the first exciting update is our second community day, which will be held on the 27th of July, Saturday.
Yes, and we've learned a lot from the last community day. We're really looking forward to welcoming everyone back. This place looks fantastic.
I'd just been out to feed the pigs and I've been in work all day in a building, not connected to nature. And it just made my heart sing to walk through the woods, hear the birds, see the abundance of flowers and grasses, and it's so special at the moment.
To show off that you're walking through the woods, not crutching through the woods.
That is true. I now have pig duty because of Tom's lameness.
Yeah, I feel like I've lost connection with the pigs now. I've got to go and reconnect when
I'm not supposed to be talking about your foot. Let's get back to the community day.
I'm part of the pigs. So, community day, there's loads of activities. There's the opportunity to get involved in the big butterfly count, which is really exciting. And this is the first time that the Grange Project will have been involved in that. I think there's lots we can learn, and just spending time at the moment going through the land and watching the butterflies flutter up from the long grass, it's just going to be fantastic. For those who want to do a bit more physical stuff, we've still got fence lines we've got to remove, got green hay we've got to cut and spread over the areas that could benefit from a more diverse sward. And to top it off, what are we doing in the evening, Chloe?
We are going to be showing Why Not Scotland, which is a 60-minute documentary which follows a young Scottish lady who explores different nature recovery projects across Europe and kind of brings the question back as why could we not become a rewilding nation in Scotland? So we're really excited about that.
Of course, the trademark Grange Project food will be available, all different flavours of cake and beverages and amazing food will be available.
I've got my menu planning is already done.
It doesn't surprise me, Chloe. So in order to sign up, look at the show notes. There's a link there in bold that you can click on and you can sign up there, or go to our website, grangeproject.co.uk, or just follow us on any of the socials and you'll see the odd message coming up about the Volunteers Day / Community Day.
So I feel like we need a little bit of a drum roll for this announcement. Can I have my special effects guy? Can you introduce that?
I'll have a word with them, see what you can do.
We have our planning permission! Yeah!
Which probably means not a lot to many people unless they've been following the journey. But yes, for people that haven't been following avidly, or maybe just forgotten everything in the last 3 weeks or whatever it is.
We made a rule not to talk about it until we got it. Probably back in February now?
Oh, let's not talk about that.
So it has been quite a long time since we actually referenced what we are getting planning for.
So we've got one of our modern barns here that we want to convert, and now will be converting into an education centre specifically designed for outreach to schools and corporates, which is really dear to our hearts. As we've been going through this journey, we've just known and we've learned more about it, that the key to this is education. You can't care about something you can't name, and increasing nature literacy, I think, is absolutely key, and something that we really can do with our backgrounds, and hoping to connect with schools and businesses in the local area to get them involved in what we're doing. So, and obviously there's a bar in there and a co-working space and a whole bunch of other stuff.
We're very excited. And in fact, we're so excited, we're going to do maybe not a whole episode, but we're going to do a kind of reflection episode as we reach our year anniversary, which is coming up very shortly. And in that, we'll talk a bit more about our hopes and plans and how people can get involved if they'd like to.
Thank goodness for that. That's all I can say.
So on that high, I think it's only right and proper that we step into the interview.
Mm-hmm.
Now, whenever anyone mentions beavers in Wales, Alicia's name comes up.
Yes.
So we were really privileged that she came along and joined us on the Wilder podcast and shared her wide knowledge on these amazing creatures.
Yeah, and I think you'll hear me getting more and more excited as the interview goes on, because it's just one of those creatures that you can kind of picture and, swimming around and with a little nose sticking out and their tail. But you don't, well, at least I didn't really fully appreciate how big they get, why they gnaw trees. So it's a really great foundational episode where it starts to build up from assumption of no knowledge all the way through to really understanding how they became extinct, why we want to bring them back, the value they can bring to the ecosystem if they do, and when they do come back, the current state of beavers in the UK. So it's a really great wraparound foundational episode all about beavers.
So welcome, Alicia, to the Wilder podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So before we get started, it'd be great if you could introduce yourself and maybe say a little about how you spend most of your professional life thinking about beavers.
So, my name's Alicia and I work on the Welsh Beaver Project for the Wildlife Trust in Wales. As my title suggests, I work right across Wales looking at bringing beavers back. But just a bit of background to me, I have a zoology, ecology background. And so following university, I did quite a few seasonal jobs, just being a field surveyor, general ecologist, just trying to find my feet in the ecology conservation world. And then one of those jobs took me off to Scotland, where I was a wildlife ranger showing people around the Highlands to talk about wildlife and the habitats where we find amazing wildlife. But the field centre I worked for also had an enclosed beaver project, and so I started managing that during my time in Scotland. And so my beaver work has gone from there. Really, it's taken me to Scotland and here down to Wales.
Before we get into hearing a bit more about the Welsh Beaver Project, for the audience who might not have come across them before, what would be important for us to know about beavers?
So beavers, they're native to Britain. They're rodents, but unlike other rodents that we might be more familiar with, mice or rats or anyone that has pet guinea pigs, for example, beavers are a slightly bit bigger. So if we were to measure an adult beaver from the tip of its nose to the end of its tail, it'll measure just over 1 metre in length.
Oh.
So that puts some perspective, that's the sort of length of a Eurasian European otter. But they're slightly fatter than an otter, and an adult beaver can weigh up to about 25 kilos. So they're a pretty hefty animal. And to give a sort of comparison, probably equivalent of, say, a medium-sized dog, a spaniel, for example. So for a rodent, a pretty big animal and a large animal returning to Britain. They love living in water, so you're likely to find them on waterways, rivers, streams, lakes or ponds, feeding on vegetation, so plant material. So beavers are famous for felling trees. One of the reasons they fell trees is for food. So it's the bark of the trees they like to eat, and they like other vegetation, so leaves off the trees, any plants growing in or near water as well. So basically a vegetarian rodent living in water is a beaver.
Whenever I think about beavers, what always comes to mind are teeth and tail.
Yeah, sort of the characteristics of a beaver. So we'll start with the tail. Unlike lots of other mammals we might be more familiar with, a beaver tail is flat. And if you were to have a close look at the tail, it almost looks like the markings on a waffle. Sort of that check markings, very flat and almost, I guess, leathery is probably the best way to describe it. It doesn't have any hair. And a beaver's tail has many functions. One of the main functions is to help it with swimming. It provides a lot of power when they're in the water. It can also help a beaver to balance in shallow water, but they also use it for signalling. So if they're out and about with their family and something might surprise them, a beaver will slap its tail in the water, and that's a warning to its family members to say there's danger out there, let's get to safety. So if you're out and about watching beavers, or you happen to be walking by a river and you hear a massive splash, have a look around, it could be a beaver signaling to you saying, I know you're here, keep away from me. I think you might be dangerous, so I'm going to head off now. So that's a beaver telling you it's not too happy. And so going to the other end of the beaver, where we have the teeth. If you were to look closely at a beaver's teeth, you'll notice they're incredibly orange. That orange is actually iron that they get from their diet that stains their teeth, that lovely orange colour. And that's to provide extra strength of teeth, to make the enamel really strong, to power through felling down trees for food and for building. And like other rodents, they need to keep their teeth nice and sharp because those incisors are constantly growing. So they need to keep them a certain length. If they weren't to do that, they'll grow too long. And obviously that could prevent them from feeding properly. So that's part of it. As I mentioned, to bring down those trees, they need those powerful teeth. And a classic thing we see with beavers, when we see pictures of beavers, it's those teeth that come through.
When they're gnawing the trees, is that for their nutritional needs? So they need to do that because it's their source of food? Or there are other functions behind them felling the trees?
Good question. There's two main reasons. One is for food. So, as I mentioned, beavers are herbivores. We often refer to them as choosy generalists. They have a wide dietary range, but it's also quite a seasonal diet as well. So, in autumn, winter, their predominant food source is deciduous trees, particularly species such as birch and willow. Aspen's also their favourite as well. And what they're really after is the bark of the trees. The bark contains all the sugary goodness for the tree. It contains the xylem and phloem vessels, which transporting all the nutrients around the trees. And it's those nutrients that the beavers want. They have a bit of a sweet tooth, and so by going for the bark, they can get to all those nice sugary goodness. The reason they fell trees is they're not good climbers, so to get to all that bark, they need to cut the trees down, and it makes it more accessible. By doing that, it provides them, once they've taken the bark of the tree, the heartwood they're not interested in at all. And then once they've cut the tree down, they've got that extra material. They can use that for them building, and their characteristic things they build are lodges for living in and for building dams as well. In summertime as well, what they're mainly feeding on is sort of soft vegetation, leaves off the trees, any grasses, plants growing in the river, in the water or on riverbanks. So they have a wide dietary range in that sense.
So I'm intrigued what exactly a beaver lodge looks like. And then it'd be great to hear a little bit about why they make dams. What's the purpose of that?
So we'll start with the lodge. The lodge is basically a beaver's home. Beavers are often they often start with building burrows, which is just, as the name suggests, a burrow often into a riverbank. And that's where they like to reside, where they sleep, and for breeding as well. So burrows can sometimes be a sort of a temporary structure along a riverbank, but sometimes they can expand them into sort of a more permanent structure. And so once they've built a burrow into a riverbank, they may then top it with mud and sticks to provide what's then referred to as a lodge. So it's basically a burrow that's been capped. Just gives them a much bigger structure, and by having that extra material on top, it can provide insulation but also protection for their home as well. Sometimes you'll get beavers just living in burrows, and they may decide not to expand them any further, and then sometimes you'll have beavers just living in lodges. It kind of depends on the habitat that's available, because if there isn't much of a riverbank, if the bank's quite shallow, they may just then build a lodge on top of the bank, which would be just a big pile of mud and sticks woven together, and that'll be a beaver's home. So within a lodge and burrow, what you essentially have is a chamber where they sleep. They may have a chamber where they're feeding, and there'll always be entrances going from those chambers into the water. So all their entrances in and out of the lodge always go into the water, because the water is where they feel safe, and so they want to go from their lodge into the water. By doing that, it means it's easier for them to go in and out without anyone else sort of detecting them, any other animals or anything that might be out there. So that's essentially a beaver's home, is a lodge.
I've got a question now, but I think Chloe asked about why do they create the dams? So before I go into my question.
Yeah. So beaver dams, basically the reason why beavers build dams, and it's important to note that they only build them if they really need to. So beavers like stable water bodies. That's what they prefer. Although they can live on rivers and streams where you've got flowing water, if they had a choice, they much prefer to live in either a big pond or a big lake where the water level is nice and stable. They like deep water, and they like water approximately about a metre deep. So if they move into an area where the water level is quite shallow, then they want to change that. They want to make the habitat better for themselves. So that's when the dam building comes in. So if they move into an area, say a small stream or tributary, water level is quite shallow, they may then build a dam. A dam is just made of mud and sticks interwoven across a water course. Then that allows the water to back up behind the dam, and you've now got that nice pool of water behind the beaver dam. So they now have that nice deep water. So it means if their lodge or burrow is nearby and the entrance of their lodge or burrow was becoming exposed, they may build a dam to raise the water level that keeps that entrance underwater so they can come and go in safety. It also means they could be near a new food resource as well. So beavers, they're so ingrained to the water, they rarely go more than 20 metres away from the water's edge. And so if they want to get to a new food resource and it's a bit too far away, they may build a dam that creates a nice pool of water. They're then much closer if they need to be. And so they'll only ever build dams if they ever need to. So if they move into an area where nice deep water, they have no need to build. And why build if you don't need to? Why expend that energy when it's not required? So they can quite happily live on main rivers. Main rivers are often deep enough as it is, quite fast flowing. So if they even build a dam, it will just get washed away. So it's more about just creating habitat that's good for themselves, and then that can have knock-on benefits for other wildlife as well. So that although we have the term biz as a beaver, they prefer not to do extra work if they don't have to.
I don't blame them. Am I right in thinking that beavers are defined as one of the few kind of ecosystem engineers? So it's really interesting that I've now learned that I just assumed they just made dams everywhere they went because that's what they wanted to do, or they have fun, that's their hobby, right? But apparently it's not the case, and that makes a lot more sense. So because I'm really keen to hear about kind of historically, you say the natives, just kind of what happened to them. But I think before we go into that, can we understand more about the secondary benefits to kind of wider ecosystem if these dams are built? Why are we so excited by them?
So you touched on the point there where they're called ecosystem engineer, often referred to engineers, so often referred to as ecosystem engineers. And another term used to describe beavers is keystone species. And these are really sort of interesting terms because it really does depict what happens in a beaver's habitat in the landscape when you have these animals being really active. So just through the knock-on benefits through their behaviour. So we talked about building dams. We've talked about their feeding behaviour where they fell trees for food and also for building. So touching on those activities really has a knock-on effect. So I'll start with their felling trees. People are often worried about beavers felling trees, but when you really look at it, what they're really doing, the species they're going for, as I mentioned, are fast-growing species like willow and birch. When they're cutting a tree down, yes, they're cutting it down, the top of that tree will then die off. But if you look at the base of the tree, that root system is still intact. They're not touching that whatsoever. And when you cut these species of trees down, if you leave them, you'll get new shoots coming through. So once that tree is cut, it's putting all its growth into the root system and then new shoots will come through. So what beavers are essentially doing, they're coppicing trees. And this is something that woodland managers have done going back hundreds of years ago. And it's possible we may even learn from beavers. By coppicing trees, we're actually promoting the life of the tree. It's providing more shoots. And if you have a rotation of trees in different stages of growth, that's really beneficial for lots of other wildlife, small mammals, small birds, like nesting in that copse, new growth coming through. You may have where beavers have cut the top of the tree and where they've taken all the food they need, there may be bits of deadwood lying around. And deadwood in a woodland or in a sort of riparian habitat, wetland habitat is really important. It's providing habitats and opportunities for fungi, for invertebrates. So you've got other wildlife, other species coming in there as well. So it's not just your big iconic animals coming back. You've also got the really small things, microscopic things coming back as well, which is hugely important. Going back to the dam building behaviour and building and, as I mentioned, creating nice stable water bodies, that's essentially a pond that they're creating. It's worth noting that the dams don't block the water. Water is still flowing through. And so what you're getting is you're getting water flow of different rates. You may have some slow water going through. If a beaver dam's allowed to establish, you may get channels forming around the side of the dam. You may get fast flowing water. You've got deep water, shallow water. And that's, again, providing habitats for lots of other wildlife, from amphibians, other aquatic invertebrates, reptiles, birds, other mammals, plants as well, all coming in. So you basically got a variety of different habitats, and by doing that you're creating homes and opportunities for the wildlife. And there's so much research that's come out from right across Europe and North America as well on the benefits and the abundance of other species coming back because of beavers. And it's often noted where you have beavers you have an increase in biodiversity, and that's hugely important. It's the variety that's there as well as the numbers.
This is great. I am loving this. I think it's so interesting, and it's one of those topics that I knew that we should explore at some point. Just haven't had the time to get across it. So I'm glad we're covering it now. We're stepping back a little bit here, but I'm just really interested as to what happened to the beavers that were native, and when did they move on or become extinct around in this area?
So we've mentioned about the importance of beavers in terms of the benefits with other wildlife, but actually the beaver themselves is a hugely important animal, and that's actually the reason why they become extinct in Britain. Why they were lost? Because they were so valuable. So if we go back a few hundred years, well, over 500 years ago, going back to here in Wales, medieval times, Middle Ages, the beaver was so important because it provided everything from clothing to food for people. So beavers were hunted for their fur. They have a beautiful, soft, thick pelt, which is incredibly warm, incredibly waterproof. And humans wanted that beautiful fur for making hats and coats. So medieval times, if you're particularly in the cold winters that we can get here in Wales, a beaver coat will keep your beaver hat will keep you nice and cozy throughout the winter months. So used for making clothing, and even sort of as we go through the ages, even making sort of fancy clothing as well. Nice top hats and felts as well came from beaver pelt. A beaver's a big animal, a lot of meat on a beaver, so they were hunted for food. Their scent glands were used for medicinal purposes. So beavers are really territorial animals. They have a set of glands called castoreum glands, which creates an oil for marking the territory. That oil is called castoreum oil and was highly prized in medieval times for medicinal purposes. It's thought that that oil could cure anything from arthritis to colds, flus, anything you could name. They thought it could cure it. It's possible they may not have been wrong with the medicinal properties of beavers, because recent studies have shown that the castoreum oil contains salicylic acid, which is actually your active ingredient in aspirin. So probably was some truth in beavers being used for medicinal purposes. Probably could cure a headache. Probably couldn't cure everything, but certainly could cure a headache. And so utilised for that. Teeth and claws used for jewellery. And one of my favourite facts from medieval times is during sort of a few hundred years ago, for the 16th century, Catholic Church considered beavers to be a fish because they live in water. Their tails scaly, so fish-like. And so because of that, because they were considered a fish, it meant they could be eaten on abstinence days as well. So every part of a beaver was utilised throughout the year. And so all of that, unfortunately, led to the demise of beavers in Wales and the rest of Britain. So just hunted to extinction. So it thought beavers went extinct just after the Middle Ages in Wales, and by 16th century completely disappeared from Britain. And unfortunately, a similar story echoed right across the majority of Europe as well.
Yeah, this is wonderful. So, I mean, not wonderful for the beavers, but very interesting, at least from my perspective. So I feel like we've done a really good foundation in terms of the knowledge for the beaver now. Okay, I feel like I can kind of picture it. I can picture the value to everything from top hats through to ecosystem engineering and all that good stuff. So fast forward now to in modern day, we've got the Welsh Beaver Project. I would love to hear about what you do and how long it's been around and why it's important.
Well, the Welsh Beaver Project's been going for a long time now. First started in 2005. And it was a time when beavers reintroduction has been discussed right across Britain at this time. And actually, at this point, it's worth noting that actually beaver reintroduction discussions have been going on since the 1970s. So just to place that in the mind to show how long it has actually taken for beavers to come back to Britain. So fast forward sort of to now, the Welsh Beaver Project started in 2005. So beaver discussions taking place in Wales. Similar time, discussions were happening in Scotland and England. Scotland already writing licence applications for release of beavers. And so it kind of made sense to look right across Britain. And so the Wildlife Trust in Wales decided to look at the feasibility of reintroducing beavers back into Wales. So back then we were part of the EU, and part of the Habitats Directive was to look at the feasibility and desirability of restoring lost species that humans have had a cause in causing them to go extinct. And so beavers is one of those animals. So it was certainly part of legislation to at least look into it. And so before you can even sort of decide whether animals come back, you need to check that the habitat's suitable. And that's what the Welsh Beaver Project did. It looked at desk-based studies, looking at Wales, what habitat's available, what water's available. There's a lot of water around in Wales. And then what sort of surrounding habitat, terrestrial habitat, is it suitable for beavers to come back from an ecological and also welfare point of view? Do we have the habitat around? Then go from there, looking at surrounding landscapes. There's lots of wild places in Wales, but there's also lots of urban areas as well, and lots of human infrastructure and activity. So how do beavers fit into that? What are the benefits going to be? What are the potential negative impacts that might come from that? And then also looking at whether people want to see beavers coming back as well. So that's where the project went, looking at what people thought about. And then from there, once the feasibility studies were undertaken, it was concluded that actually there is a place for beavers in Wales. There's lots of suitable habitats. Most people want to see beavers coming back. Some people did have concerns, which is understandable. We haven't had these animals around for a long time. So looking at how beavers fit into a modern landscape, and looking at where there may be negative impacts and how we manage that. And then from there, we've been looking at various potential release sites. And so we've been looking at over the years. The project's had a number of setbacks over the years as well. And I've been in post since 2016 looking at potential sites where we can release beavers and looking sort of now at possible sites and putting proposals and license applications together for beavers to be released into the wild in Wales.
I'm really intrigued that the conversation started back in the 1970s about reintroduction, yet we're now 50 years later, still talking about beaver reintroductions. And you mentioned that there are some kind of concerns that people hold about beavers coming back into the landscape. What are the main concerns that are raised and who are they raised by?
So in the sort of start of the project, I think a lot of it was the unknown. We haven't had these animals around for so long. And back then, beavers hadn't officially been reintroduced in 2005. Beavers hadn't been officially introduced into Britain at all. So although there might have been some enclosed projects back then, there were no beavers in the wild. And so fewer knowns, but now we have a lot of answers from looking at other countries. Now we have beavers in Scotland and in England and in parts of Wales. We can hopefully address some of the concerns. But the main concerns are the likely impacts we're going to see with beavers. And it's worth recognising that there may be these impacts is... So, for example, unwanted tree felling. If your garden backs onto a river, you may not want beavers taking out specimen trees that may have a financial value or an emotional value to some people. And so unwanted tree felling is a big concern. Beaver dams comes up quite a lot. I think part of it is people thinking that beavers may build dams everywhere. And as I've touched upon, it's not the case. But in certain areas, there may be dams in unsuitable locations. So, for example, if you have drainage ditches, for example, are quite a nice area that beavers might like to dam. They're often in straight lines, could be quite shallow and provide the ideal opportunity. Often there's the right size for beavers to want to build a dam. So, for example, if beavers got into a drainage ditch, started building a dam, that might not be suitable because that could then cause localized flooding on a nearby field or road or human infrastructure activity of some kind. So dams in unsuitable places can be a concern. Trees maybe being felled in unsuitable areas, sort of nearby roads or, for example, infrastructure could be a concern. Dams sort of potentially blocking passage for migratory fish often comes up. So those are kind of the main concerns that people have. But with that, there are lots of ways we can manage beavers. So as I mentioned, we're in a really good position now in Wales because beavers have been reintroduced to parts of Britain. In parts of Europe where beavers were introduced decades ago. Really good country to look at is Germany, particularly the state of Bavaria, where beavers were introduced in the 1960s. For the past 30 years, they've developed a really robust beaver management structure because they've come across these concerns, some of these impacts along the way, which are not necessarily desirable. But rather than just say no to the beavers, they've worked alongside the beavers and looking at ways that they can manage some of these issues. So, for example, if there's certain trees you want to protect or you're concerned about beavers taking out, you can protect them by just putting some wire mesh around the base of the trees. And that could protect them in key areas. So if you've got big trees along the side of a road, you can protect all those trees to stop them being felled onto a road, for example. Dams in unsuitable places. Depending on the situation, you may be able to modify the dam, remove the dam, but if that's not the case, you can sometimes install certain devices or flow devices into a beaver dam, which is basically a big pipe that's installed within the dam, and it's installed in such a way that it returns the water level back to normal, so that can reduce the risk of any localized flooding behind that beaver dam. And so you've got the beavers still being active and you can still go about your business and not have the worry of beavers flooding sort of certain areas. I mentioned sort of dams preventing passage for migratory fish. That comes up quite a bit. There's been lots of studies on this. Some of these studies coming from Scotland, but also parts of Europe and also North America, where it's shown that actually migratory fish, such as salmon, trout, are most often or not can migrate over beaver dams and sometimes through beaver dams. And where you have those side channels from dams that have been more established, that migratory fish can use those as well to get from one side to another. But if there are concerns, some cases people have put in fish passages within dams or even sort of notching the dams to allow easy passage for migratory fish. And what the studies have often shown is where you have concerns with beaver dams is often when you've got low, it's often temporary, we have low water flow, that it's difficult for migratory fish such as salmon and trout to get over. But as soon as the water levels rise, they're then able to go along their way. So in that sense, it's no different than having natural waterfalls within our river systems that migratory fish have to try and navigate anyway. So although there are concerns, there are lots of ways that we can manage them. And it's just been aware that there will be some negative impacts along the way, but we shouldn't be using that as a reason to say no. We should be working with these animals, looking what's there and looking at techniques that can be used. And essentially it's learning to live with beavers once again. And we've forgotten how to live with them. 500 years is a long time in terms of humans. in terms of ecology, that's not long at all. So it's just ourselves getting used to these animals coming back.
So it's great hearing you talk about the process, the journey to releasing them in the wild. And what I didn't realize is when people were talking, even they've been talking to us about, you guys going to get beavers? They're talking about huge enclosures. So I assume that's the only way you can kind of have beavers at this moment in time. So I'd love to hear, what stage are we at with these beaver reintroductions? Mm-hmm. Do they all have to go into enclosures, or actually are we beyond that now and we're looking at forging the path for releasing them into the wild?
That's a really good question and a really good thing to touch upon. So with the Welsh Beaver Project, our aim has always been the reintroduction of beavers into the wild, release of beavers into the wild. But as you mentioned, there are enclosed projects as well. So I'm just going to go back a bit and just touch upon England and Scotland to give a bit of context. So with Scotland, the very first beaver introduction took place in 2009 in Scotland, and that was a reintroduction into the wild, which was a Scottish beaver trial. And then shortly afterwards, some beavers were found so the Scottish beaver trial took place on the west side of the country, and then some beavers are found on the River Tay on the east side of the country, again beavers in the wild. And so Scotland have mainly gone down to beavers in the wild through the Scottish beaver trial, and sort of now fast forward from 2009 to 2019 when beavers were recognised as a native species in Scotland once again and became a European protected species. There's a few enclosed projects in Scotland, but they're all mainly privately owned. So essentially, beavers in Scotland, when they come back, it's been into the wild. In England, we have a number of enclosed projects, but there's also wild beaver populations. And I guess the most famous wild beaver population is probably the River Otter Beaver Trial. Most people would have heard of that project, which was a number of beavers found on the River Otter in Devon, I think 2008, possibly when they were first discovered. But in 2015, Devon Wildlife Trust applied for a licence to bring those beavers into an official project, and that became the River Otter Beaver Trial. So reintroduction trial in the wild in England. So that was a 5-year trial. And then when that ended in 2020, the UK government announced that those beavers on the River Otter could stay. And last year, I think, beavers were then recognised as a native species. 22 beavers are recognised as a native species in England once again and became a European protected species. And so there's been a mixed bag of projects, from wild releases to enclosed projects, and there are a number of enclosed projects in England. In Wales, as I mentioned, Welsh Beaver Project is mainly looking at beavers out in the wild, but there are also a number of enclosed projects as well. There's 4 enclosed projects to date. 3 are privately owned, and I think the longest running one is from sort of starting off in 2011. And then the latest one has been with Montgomeryshire Wildlife Trust at Causdovey Nature Reserve. And there's also a licence also being granted for another enclosure which will be established quite soon. So a lot of the enclosed projects, for some it's sort of landowners wanting to see beavers back, and at the time the only way to do it is to bring beavers is through an enclosed release. You need a licence to release beavers into the wild in Wales. You now also need a licence to release into an enclosure as well. But part of the enclosures is looking at ways to bring beavers back. But with a more recent project with at Causdovey Nature Reserve, that was mainly to look at using beavers as a habitat management tool. And so Causdovey Nature Reserve is a low-lying peat bog, but if anyone's ever been to visit that nature reserve, you'll now notice that it's basically covered with willow scrub, which isn't your characteristic vegetation bog habitat. The nature reserve, when Montgomeryshire Wildlife Trust took it on, was a conifer plantation, and so to restore it, they got rid of the conifer plantation, but that willow scrub just took hold. And so they've been trying to manage the willow ever since, because it is drying out the wetland habitat, and it's been very difficult to manage. As soon as you cut the willow, it grows back. It's really hard to tackle sort of the more established trees, particularly ex-forestry. It's really difficult in terms of health and safety trying to get onto the reserve to manage it. So they've used water buffalo in the past, and the water buffalo did a fantastic job, but they found that eventually the water buffalo only taking off this new regrowth, the softer vegetation, and not going for the more established willow. And so that's when we started looking at using beavers, because beavers love water and they love willow as well. So those two things combined beavers became the obvious tool to try and manage this habitat. So we created a big enclosure and released a family of beavers into that enclosure in 2021. And as I mentioned, to manage that habitat. But the knock-on benefit has been the public engagement opportunity to tell people more about beavers, show them beavers in the evenings during the summer, during designated beaver watching visits. And so that can then link into our wider work of bringing beavers back into the wild in Wales, which is what we really after want to see beavers in the wild. So as I mentioned with the project, it's been when we've been looking at it from the very beginning, it's been reintroduction of beavers in the wild. But having said that, we are now starting to see beavers coming back anyway. Beavers are popping up in various locations in the wild in Wales. And so we're looking at some of those sites where beavers are already there and looking at bringing them into an official project as part of the Welsh Beaver Project, looking at maybe releasing just a few beavers to help with genetic diversity of those animals that are already out there, boosting sort of the population, having sort of a nice healthy population, and looking at the opportunities for sort of Aston, Natural Resources Wales and Welsh Government is to recognise beavers as being back, recognising them being a native species once again, and looking at sort of the appropriate protection as we have seen in Scotland and England.
Oh, it's really exciting to hear about all of the beavers doing their thing across the Welsh landscape. And I feel slightly intimidated by what might be involved with getting a beaver licence, because I'm guessing that's a lot of paperwork.
Yeah.
But, I hope that maybe we might see beavers in Monmouthshire in our lifetime. That'd be pretty cool. I guess, what are the hopes for the Welsh Beaver Project, and where do people go to find out more about it?
So our hopes are based, kind of what I've mentioned is, our hopes are to see beavers recognised as native species once again, to see nice healthy populations, and seeing beavers normalised as a species that is out there and is the same as any other wildlife. So when you see a hedgehog in your garden, or a fox, or blue tits on your bird feeders, we're used to those. So it'd be just great to see, if you're walking by a river and you see a beaver, that you're just happy to see a beaver, then it should be there doing its thing. So that's our hope. And some of where beavers are in the wild, to see them as nice healthy populations rather than just one or two beavers scattered here. So eventually we'd like to see beavers across Wales, but yeah, just starting off with a few sites for now and just going from there, because obviously the legislation, there's licence applications to go through, but eventually it'd be nice to see in decades to come that beavers are just part of our landscape and we're happy for them to be there. And worth noting as well that although I mentioned beavers disappeared over 500 years ago in Wales, there's actually culturally, there's a big link there with beavers in our landscape. There's various place names in Wales that has a word Ifanc in, and Ifanc is a Welsh word for beaver. So it just shows that there must have been beavers in those areas at one point, that it's made it into place names. So within our living memory, there are beavers there historically. In folklore as well, the Ifanc pops up quite a bit. So it is part of our culture, the culture here in Wales, and Wales has amazing culture and historical links, and so just bringing that forwards to now, and to see beavers as not just a historic animal in Wales, but as a modern animal that's here living and breathing and living alongside us. To find out more about the work we're doing here in Wales and the Welsh Beaver Project, please do head over to our website. So that's welshbeaverproject.org. There's lots of information on there that you can find about what we're doing. And if you want to keep in touch with our project, sign up to our newsletter. You can also find us on social media, Facebooks and X. If you just search the handle at Beaver Ifanc, and that's Ifanc, AFANC, you'll find us on there and keep up to date with what's going on with the project.
All of those links will be in the show notes for people that don't have a pen handy, so never fear. Alicia, thank you so much for everything. You've just, all that information, your passion has come through, and all the hard work. I mean, like you say, you've been doing it for a good long period now, and I you can see we're moving along the journey to seeing this reintroduction, and I hope we get there sooner rather than later.
Thanks for having me. It's great talking to you guys.
I feel like I can really appreciate now why people get just so excited about beavers in the rewilding space. Because what have we done so far? We've been here. We've tried to build some ponds. We've created leaky woody debris. And we've been thinking about doing some coppicing, all of which, if we had a beaver, we wouldn't have to do, because they would have done all those effects and enhanced diversity in so many ways.
Absolutely right. I'll just pull you up on, we wouldn't have a beaver. We would be sharing our space with the beaver. Mm-hmm. And I think this is a mindset change. I think it's very important. But yes, no, I get your point there. And it is a little bit disturbing how long it's taken to get to where we've got to. But having gone through the branding process recently, I have a bit of sympathy for Alicia and the challenges associated with bringing back the unknown.
It's one of those slightly depressing things, I think, about the human condition, that first of all, we hunt the beavers to extinction. Then we spend 50 years talking about whether we should reintroduce them. Then we do hundreds of research trials. And then our solution to that is, let's do a license with all this bureaucracy around it. And then we put them in an enclosure and do more research. It just feels like we're trying to put so many barriers in place. And I think it's a bit because we're an island, and it kind of feels like when we introduce new things onto our island, there's a really big deal. And I think that point about the unknown is a really important one, because no one likes change, even though really the beavers were here first.
Yeah, and I think if you follow that thought process, that way doth lie madness. So let's not keep good now. I think you just got to, like Alicia's been doing, just one hurdle at a time, keep pushing the boundaries. And it sounds like these beavers are finding their ways into our water systems magically as well, which is nice to hear.
Yeah, and certainly my sense in the limited time we've been engaged in the rewilding conservation sphere, our beavers are becoming quite regular news items, whether they're appearing at heel rewilding, or we talked about the beavers of Ealing in the episode with Elliot and Digby from Citizen Zoo. It feels like there is a momentum behind the beavers. There's no stopping them now.
Let's hope so. Imagine waking up one day and have a look out the window and seeing a little, not so little beaver just beavering around.
In our lifetimes, I hope that will happen.
I think it'll be sooner than that. But anyway, so I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you found it as interesting, as fascinating as we have. Before I wrap up, I have my beautiful call to action prepared. Chloe, have you got anything else you want to say?
I think it's just made me think that it would be really great to do some further episodes looking at some of these keystone species or ecosystem engineers that are really foundational to the British
ecosystem.
Let's go with ecosystem.
Yeah, I think that's great. And again, listeners, if you think that's a good idea as well, please feel free to let us know. It's always nice to give us a bit of a prod and poke and get us into the direction that you want to enjoy and listen to. And I will say that our rating reviews have been going up slowly, and I think it's worth mentioning that if you are enjoying this and you want to do something to support the project, honestly, the best thing you can do right now is just whatever podcasting platform you listen to, if you can rate and review the podcast, every list counts and it makes a big difference. So thank you very much if you've already done it, and hopefully other people will be inspired by your efforts.
Thank you, Tom, for recording with your poorly foot.
Can I go to bed now?